turn on the gentle massage action. What relief.
Look at that shine. It's a Cerebella with lanolin.
Our gyms are different. If you don't mind a mauling, you don't have to work.
Tucked in junk drawers and kitchen cabinets, these gadgets made 0 sense, yet everyone had them. Long before smart homes, people relied on strange contraptions to solve problems you didn't even know existed. Some were clever, some were pointless, all of them were unforgettable. The electric cigarette dispenser was the kind of kitchen accessory that made you feel like a Bond villain before breakfast. In the 1950s, having one of these meant you were modern, stylish, and not about to fumble with a cigarette pack like a commoner. You'd load a stack of cigarettes into the chamber, press a big chrome button, and voila, a single cigarette would elegantly pop out, ready for lighting. Some models lit the cigarette for you. Others just made a weird buzzing noise and shot it into your hand like a vending machine with attitude. It was half gadget, half status symbol. These things were placed on coffee tables, in bedrooms, and next to bathroom sinks like they were art pieces. Some even played music while dispensing, because apparently nothing sets the mood like smooth jazz and lung damage. They came in gold-plated finishes, lucite casings, and occasionally had matching ashtray sets that looked like alien eggs. Needless to say, they became a fire hazard and were eventually phased out once people started realizing that mixing electronics, flammable sticks, and shag carpet might not be the best combo. And while that device only lit up your cigarettes, the next one lit up your whole bathroom, literally. In the 1950s, the plug-in toilet seat warmer was marketed as a slice of pure luxury. In reality, it was a corded danger zone designed to toast your behind while flirting with electrocution. These warmers plugged directly into the wall, had almost no insulation, and were often paired with metal fixtures because apparently outlets weren't invented yet, or just ignored. You'd sit down in winter, flip a switch, and feel your seat gently warm up like a budget hot stone massage. Problem was, the heat wasn't exactly regulated. Some models got too warm. Others shocked you when you shifted. And more than a few gave off the smell of burning vinyl after an hour of use. Safety wasn't the vibe. Comfort was. These seat warmers came in all kinds of 50s colors, mint green, dusty rose, and that unforgettable shade of beige that haunted every mid-century powder room. People loved them, right up until someone's uncle got zapped mid-sit and they were pulled off shelves or quietly discontinued. Today's heated toilet seats are sleek, safe, and thermostat controlled. But back then, it was all sizzle, no sense. And if warming up your bathroom wasn't enough, the next item took things to the other extreme by requiring a full upper body workout just to dry your hair. Before Dyson made hair dryers look like unidentified flying objects, drying your hair meant cranking a handle like you were powering a small boat. Hand-cranked hair dryers were exactly what they sound like. Metal contraptions with a crank on one side and a nozzle on the other. You had to turn it by hand while pointing it at your hair, hoping the airflow was warm enough to do something besides blowing strands in every direction. Some models required 2 people, one to crank, one to aim. Others came with foot pedals, like you were sewing your scalp into submission. They were heavy, noisy, and about as effective as waving a frying pan at your head. Still, they were popular for a time because they didn't rely on electricity and made you feel like you were doing something fancy. Bonus, they doubled as hand warmers and bicep trainers. The chrome finish gave them a cool, space-age look until they started rusting from constant bathroom humidity. Eventually, the invention of electric motors made them obsolete, but if you ever see one at a thrift shop, try not to laugh too hard. Someone once thought that was innovation, and if winding a crank for 10 minutes sounds exhausting, wait till you hear about the machine that promised to make your bed without lifting a finger. The bed-making machine was either a dream come true or an over-engineered nightmare, depending on how often you actually made your bed. Invented in the mid-20th century and quickly forgotten, this gadget promised a neatly made bed every morning with 0 effort. It worked like this. Metal arms under the mattress would lift it up slightly while a set of rollers tugged the sheets into place. Sounds smart, right? Until you saw it in action. It groaned like a rusty garage door and moved so slowly you could make the bed faster by hand while blindfolded. And if your sheets weren't perfectly aligned before starting it, too bad. It just smoothed whatever was there, lumps, wrinkles, and all. Some early models also pinched fingers, pulled hair, or malfunctioned mid-lift, trapping the mattress at a 45-degree angle like a fabric tent. It was supposed to be the future of lazy living, but between the noise, weight, and price tag, it became more of a conversation piece than a daily helper. Eventually, manufacturers stopped pushing it, and the machine quietly disappeared from the market. Unlike this next invention, which didn't disappear so much as get sucked straight into your wall. The wall-mounted ashtray vacuum was peak 1960s problem-solving. Why just stub your cigarette when you could suck it into oblivion? These odd little gadgets were built right into the wall, usually next to your favorite recliner or in the wood-paneled basement, where every table already had at least 3 ashtrays. The idea was simple. You'd flick your ash into the metal tray, press a button, and a small vacuum would slurp up the ashes and cigarette butts into a hidden collection chamber behind the wall. Gone in a puff. No mess, no fuss, just the sweet hum of carcinogens disappearing into the drywall. Homeowners loved it because it felt futuristic, like something from the Jetsons, except instead of cleaning robots, you had a hole in the wall full of soot and smoldering paper. The problem? Nobody cleaned the vacuum chamber, ever. Some models would clog. Others caught fire because, surprise, hot ashes and dusty drywall insulation do not mix well. They also became nesting grounds for bugs, mold, and whatever else liked warm, smoky crevices. Eventually, fire codes caught up, and these were phased out or sealed up and forgotten behind retro wallpaper. If your grandparents had one, it's probably still hiding back there, waiting patiently in the shadows. And while that one tried to hide your bad habits, the next device went all in on pretending to fix them, with a jiggly vengeance. The vibrating weight loss belt was the fitness lie that refused to die. If you've ever seen old ads of women in high-waisted underwear standing on rubber mats while giant bands jiggled their torsos, you've seen this thing in action. The premise? Strap in, flip a switch, and let the machine shake the fat right off your body. No sweat, no work, just good old-fashioned mid-century delusion. These machines were everywhere, in basements, gyms, even spas, buzzing away like over-caffeinated washing machines. They had giant padded belts, chrome-plated stands, and sometimes even coin slots for public use. You'd stand there, vibrating violently, while pretending you were getting slimmer by the second. In truth, the only thing getting toned was your patience. They didn't actually do much. Sure, they increased circulation and gave your organs a thrill ride, but real fat loss? Not so much. Some users complained of dizziness, bruising, and what can only be described as shaken spine syndrome. And yet, people swore by them, probably because standing still while something did anything felt revolutionary at the time. Eventually, science caught up and crushed the dream, but for a while, jiggling your way to fitness was as American as TV dinners and shag carpet. And if a chrome-plated weight loss machine wasn't classy enough, the next invention added a little butler flair to your hallway. In the 1950s, having a shoe polishing cabinet with a built-in buffer made you feel like royalty, or at least like someone who knew how to keep their loafers shiny without lifting a finger. These cabinets were usually tucked near the front door, inside closets, or even in hotel lobbies. Shaped like tiny wooden footstools, they looked harmless, until you opened them to reveal spinning brushes, polish dispensers, and enough mechanical parts to qualify as low-key weapons. You'd press your foot onto the base, push a button, and the brushes would whirl into action like caffeinated squirrels. One brush cleaned, one buffed. The third one, well, that one could polish your shoe and sand down your ankle if you weren't careful. Some models had foot sensors. Others required a foot pedal that you operated like a sewing machine. They came in polished mahogany, avocado green, and of course, chrome. For extra flair, high-end versions played music while buffing. Really, this was self-care, 1950s style. Unfortunately, they weren't always safe. The motors overheated, the brushes wore down to bare wires, and let's just say shoelace entanglement was a real thing. Eventually, people realized that a rag and 10 seconds worked just as well without risking bloodshed. And just when you thought polishing your shoes was the height of home luxury, along came the gadget that crushed ice like it owed you money. If you lived through the mid-century cocktail boom, you know the power of crushed ice, and nothing said classy host quite like the Ice Crusher sink attachment. This was not a countertop appliance. No, this bad boy mounted directly onto your kitchen sink like a dental tool from the future. You'd jam in regular ice cubes, flip the switch, and listen as it groaned, screeched, and spat out jagged bits of frozen magic straight into your glass. No blenders, no hammering a bag of cubes in the driveway, just pure, crunchy goodness ready for your whiskey sour. It was the kitchen's answer to nightclub glam. But the problem? It wasn't particularly user-friendly. The noise was somewhere between broken garbage disposal and metal grinder in distress. Fingers occasionally got too close to the blade, and more than one kid got a mini frostbite incident trying to taste the snow. Some models leaked water. Others launched ice chunks across the kitchen like tiny frozen missiles. And when the motor started wearing down, it sounded like it was trying to summon demons through the plumbing. Still, for a while, this was the ultimate home bar flex. And just in case your freezer was too overachieving, the next home gadget was literally a handheld weapon for fighting frost. Before frost-free fridges became a thing, people used refrigerator defroster guns, yes, guns, to wage war on frozen shelves. These handheld tools looked like ray guns from a 1950s sci-fi film, complete with plastic triggers, bright-colored casings, and metal nozzles that blasted hot air like a mini dragon breath. Their entire purpose was to melt away the inches of ice that would build up inside your fridge and freezer every few weeks. You'd plug it in, aim it at the frost like you were zapping aliens, and hope it didn't short-circuit halfway through. They got hot. Too hot. The cord would overheat, the nozzle would sizzle, and if you left it too close to the plastic lining, melt city. Some even had temperature dials, though low and high often felt identical, both capable of boiling your fingerprints clean off. They were wildly dangerous, shock-prone, and weirdly addictive to use. People loved them because they were faster than boiling water and less messy than chiseling ice with a butter knife. But as soon as frost-free models hit the market, these blaster guns were quietly tossed into drawers and yard sales, relics of a Cold War fought one fridge at a time. And after all that manual labor, you'd think the next invention would help you relax? How about a fresh cup of coffee served before you even open your eyes? The bedside coffee maker was the kind of invention that made you feel like royalty or a mad scientist, sometimes both. These oddball machines were designed to sit right on your nightstand, brewing a fresh pot of coffee while you slowly clawed your way out of sleep. Imagine a clock radio, a small kettle, and an alarm system all fused into one contraption, ready to wake you with a gurgle and a puff of steam instead of a buzzer. You'd set it the night before with grounds and water, and by the time your alarm went off, you were greeted by the glorious smell of morning motivation without moving an inch. Of course, the downside was having a hot plate and scalding liquid this close to your pillow. Knock it over while reaching for the snooze button? Congratulations, you just baptized your sheets with boiling coffee. Early models weren't exactly safety tested, and some had bizarre wiring setups or leaky components that soaked the nightstand or worse. But for a little while, they offered a glorious promise that the best part of waking up was not leaving bed to get your coffee. Eventually, the dream gave way to the reality of kitchen-bound Keurigs and automatic brewers. But if you ever had one of these percolating beasts on your nightstand, you knew luxury came with a little danger. And speaking of things you'd bolt next to your bed, wait until you meet the home salon solution that turned your bathroom into a beauty parlor. Wall-mounted hair-drying helmets were straight out of the beauty shop and straight into your home if you were brave enough to bolt one to your bathroom wall. These bulky contraptions looked like something an astronaut would wear to sleep. You'd sit on a stool, lower the dome over your head, and flip a switch. Then came the whoosh, that low rumbling hum that sounded like you were preparing for takeoff. Hot air would circulate inside the plastic bubble, drying your hair while making it nearly impossible to hear anything else. Great for drying, less great for conversations or spontaneous fire alarms. Originally designed for home beauty routines, They became a suburban must-have during the 60s and 70s for anyone who wanted salon results without the appointment or the gossip. There was a glamorous kind of isolation to it, like you were in your own little hair helmet meditation chamber. Women used the downtime to read magazines, file their nails, or zone out completely. Some even said it was the quietest moment of their entire day. But these gadgets weren't exactly built with convenience in mind. They took forever to heat up, the airflow was often uneven, and if you had thick hair, forget it. You were trapped under a warm plastic dome for what felt like hours. The wall mount requirement made it even more of a commitment. No moving it from room to room or tucking it in a closet. Once it was installed, it was there for life, like a loyal but slightly menacing beauty companion. Still, they had their fans. And for a while, they made you feel like you were living in a Jetsons episode, just with more frizz. And if that heat left you hungry, the next device tackled snack time with buttery ambition, though not always neatly. The electric corn popper with a built-in butter dispenser was what every movie night needed, and what every countertop feared. This glorious mess maker popped your kernels and drizzled melted butter over them at the same time, which sounds like perfection until you realize it worked more like a butter cannon than a drizzle. You'd load in the kernels, add a pat or 6 of butter into the metal tray above, and hit start. The machine would rumble, heat, and then burst to life, sending popcorn flying in every direction while the butter slowly liquefied and trickled down. In theory, it coated the popcorn evenly. In reality, it splattered everywhere. Your hands, your bowl, the counter, maybe even the cat. These gadgets had little concern for aim or cleanup. If you were lucky, you'd catch most of the popcorn in a bowl. If not, your floor was snack central for a week. Some of them looked like mini spaceships, others like vintage vending machines, and they all shared the same fatal flaw. Cleanup was a nightmare. The butter tray would crust over, the popping chamber would get scorched bits stuck to it, and you could never quite get the smell of old oil out. And yet, people loved them. They felt futuristic and cozy all at once, turning your living room into a greasy, cinematic wonderland. Some had clear domes that made you feel like you were watching a popcorn volcano erupt in real time. Others had mechanical arms to stir the kernels, but most shared the same struggle. The butter was never hot enough to fully melt by the time the popping stopped, so you'd get half a bowl drenched and the other half dry enough to start a small fire. Still, it was better than dry popcorn, and for that brief, buttery golden age, it felt like you owned your own snack station, greasy floors and all. And if you needed a place to eat your popcorn while watching television, the next gadget had you and your cigarette covered. Television trays with built-in ashtrays and cup holders were the pinnacle of 1960s convenience. They took the idea of dinner in front of the tube and cranked it all the way up to Couch Potato Commander. These foldable metal trays came with side compartments designed to hold your drink of choice, usually a soda or something far stronger, and a detachable metal ashtray where you could rest your cigarette in between bites. No more reaching, no more balancing acts. It was all within lazy arm's reach. The trays were often adorned with bright colors, weird floral patterns, or psychedelic swirls that looked like someone spilled paint and called it art. Some even had built-in handles for easy transport, though easy was a relative term, especially when balancing a TV dinner, a highball glass, and a lit cigarette. They were perfect for solo dinners, television dinners, or chain-smoking marathons during Wheel of Fortune. And every family had that one tray with a bent leg, the one that tipped just a little but never got thrown out because it still works fine. But they were also wobbly. One wrong elbow jab, and your meal, your ash, and your drink were airborne. The ashtrays sometimes came loose, the legs occasionally folded on their own, and no one who ever cleaned one would call them easy wipe. Try getting Salisbury steak gravy out of a mesh hinge. Still, they were the accessory for living rooms of the time, when smoking indoors was normal and carrying your meal from the kitchen felt like too much work. And when that tray leg snapped and sent your food flying, it was just part of the experience. But if those trays ever tore a hole in your sock while you were eating, don't worry. The next gadget had a perfectly egg-shaped fix. Sock darner eggs might sound like something you'd find in a chicken coop, but they were actually a home staple for anyone living before the age of $5 socks and Amazon Prime. These smooth, egg-shaped tools were made of wood, porcelain, or plastic, and they lived quietly in your sewing kit until the heel of your sock gave out. You'd slip the sock over the egg, which stretched the fabric just enough to let you see the hole and sew it shut. Think of it as a sock stretcher/patchwork canvas. Some darner eggs came with small notches for grip, and others had little handles so you could steady them like a paintbrush. Kids who grew up with them often mistook them for toys, until their mother shouted, "That's for socks, not sword fights!" Some were hand-painted or passed down through generations, their worn surfaces bearing tiny scratches and dings from decades of use. And back when socks were built to last and too expensive to toss out, a darner egg was essential. Housewives, grandmothers, and anyone with a needle and thread used these regularly to keep the whole family's sock game strong. It wasn't just about patching. It was about pride. A well-darned sock meant a well-run home. The process was simple but surprisingly satisfying. Thread, stitch, smooth, done. No landfill, no shopping, just good old-fashioned repair. Eventually, the world moved on to disposable everything, and darner eggs quietly rolled into antique shops and nostalgia bins, symbols of a time when fixing things was second nature, not a YouTube tutorial. But if you thought sock eggs were quaint, just wait until you meet the penguin that lived next to your sink and spit soap on command. Somewhere between adorable and absurd, the Insync dish soap dispenser shaped like a penguin waddled its way into kitchens during the 1960s and 1970s. Yes, a penguin. Perched proudly beside the faucet, this rotund plastic bird would dispense soap directly into your sponge with a gentle press to its belly or beak, depending on the model. It was the kind of gadget that made guests do a double take and made kids actually volunteer to help with dishes. The soap would sometimes squirt perfectly. Other times, it would projectile launch like a bird with boundary issues. But people loved it because it added just a touch of personality to an otherwise dreary chore. You weren't just cleaning dishes. You were interacting with a kitchen companion who never judged your burnt casserole. The appeal of anthropomorphic gadgets was big back then. Whether it was salt shakers shaped like squirrels or clocks shaped like sunflowers, the vibe was cheerful chaos. Of course, hygiene wasn't its strong suit. Over time, these things got grimy, the plastic turned yellow, and the pump mechanism would clog, turning your cute penguin into a very stubborn soap vault. The opening where the soap came out would crust over, and the once fun gadget started looking like it belonged in a horror movie. Still, it held a weird charm, especially in homes where the matching dish towel had ducks or kittens on it. These days, they're more likely to show up in a thrift store than an actual sink, but if you ever pumped soap from a penguin's face, you know the magic it brought to scrubbing plates. And speaking of weirdly convenient spots for everyday habits, how about lighting a cigarette in the same mirror you shaved in? Bathroom mirror cigarette lighters were, for a brief moment in time, the peak of post-war convenience. Picture this. You've just finished a clean shave, towel still around your neck, and instead of reaching for a match, you press a button on the edge of the mirror. A glowing coil lights up, just like in your car, and there you go, puffing away like a noir film detective. These built-in lighters were installed into mirrored medicine cabinets or set into chrome wall panels, blending personal grooming with personal vices in a way only mid-century design could. They were marketed as sleek, modern, and efficient. No need to fumble with matches. No need to leave the bathroom. Just light up and contemplate life over the sink. Some models even had a small ashtray built into the cabinet. One drawer for Q-tips, another for Marlboros. There was something eerily casual about smoking in the same spot you stored your toothpaste. But remember, this was a time when cigarette ads featured doctors and ashtrays came standard in baby strollers. The wiring, unsurprisingly, aged poorly. Moisture and electricity do not mix, and many homeowners eventually had to remove these lighters once they started buzzing or shorting out when you tried to brush your teeth. But in their heyday, they were the ultimate symbol of man cave meets bathroom. You weren't just lighting a cigarette, you were performing a ritual. one cloud of smoke at a time. But not everything in the past ran on heat or hazard. Some gadgets ran purely on gears and grit. The mechanical egg beater with rotary handles was the original fitness meets food tool. Long before KitchenAid mixers took over every counter, these handheld wonders did all the whipping, folding, and frothing with nothing but elbow grease. You'd crank a side handle connected to two spinning beaters and watch as eggs, batter, or cream swirled into submission. It was simple, durable, and built like a tank. These beaters came in gleaming metal with wooden or plastic handles and often hung proudly from hooks like culinary trophies. Kids were assigned beater duty in the hopes of building character, or just keeping them busy while dinner cooked. The rhythm of the beater had its own charm. It was part musical instrument, part medieval weapon. Every grandmother had one. And if you were lucky, you got to lick the beaters after whipping cream for pies, which somehow tasted better when you had to work for it. Sure, the handle would eventually squeak, and one beater would always rotate more than the other, but that was part of the game. Some families passed these beaters down like heirlooms, usually along with a story about how we made everything from scratch before microwaves ruined the world. It's not hard to imagine a parallel universe where these things had Bluetooth. Thankfully, they didn't. Today, they sit quietly in antique drawers or turn up in farmhouse-themed kitchens as decor. But once upon a time, they were the heart of the kitchen. Manual, loud, and proud. And if that kitchen had more than one cook yelling over the blender, the next gadget helped you holler in style. Built-in wall radios with intercom systems were the pride of suburban homes that wanted to feel just a little bit high-tech. These control panels were installed in kitchens, hallways, or living rooms and let you blast music through multiple rooms or talk to someone upstairs without shouting like a maniac. Want to tell the kids dinner was ready? Press a button and send your voice echoing through the entire house like a presidential address. Want to listen to the weather or the morning news while you ironed? Flip the dial. The dream was a connected home long before the internet got involved. The reality? Tinny speakers, constant feedback, and wires that ran through your walls like an old-school surveillance system. Still, for a while, it worked. You could hear Elvis while folding laundry. You could interrupt your teenager's moody music to say, "Take out the trash," without ever climbing stairs. Some panels had sliders and built-in clocks. Others had cassette decks that looked like they came straight out of a spaceship. Intercoms weren't just for mansions anymore. Anyone with a ranch-style home and some spare change could feel like a space-age operator. Eventually, these systems faded into the background noise of progress. The wires corroded, the speakers buzzed, and families traded in their wall radios for cordless phones and, later, group chats. But if you ever pressed that glowing red button and heard your voice echo through the living room, you know how powerful and just a little ridiculous it felt. And before Bluetooth fridges and voice assistants, the next gadget let you churn like a pioneer, but with the power of a small engine. Electric butter churns were where old-world tradition met full-blown modern enthusiasm. Imagine a glass or stainless steel container with a motorized paddle inside, spinning away while you leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping coffee and waiting for the magic to happen. These churns took the grunt work out of an age-old process and turned it into a mid-century domestic flex. Who needs store-bought butter when you can plug in a $200 appliance to whip it up fresh? The models varied wildly. Some looked like oversized mason jars with electric tops. Others resembled food processors on steroids. You poured in cream, maybe added a pinch of salt, and let it go. The whirring sound filled the kitchen, and after a while, the transformation began. Cream to thick cream to butter, pure, spreadable gold. Some machines even had built-in ice compartments to keep things cool. But cleanup? That was the real churn. Every nook filled with butterfat, every part slippery and hard to reach. Still, families swore by the flavor. It was a badge of authenticity, a homemade rebellion against processed food. They became less common as food processors got better and store butter got cheaper. But every now and then, one resurfaces in a retro kitchen or estate sale, usually still greasy and half full of dreams. You might not need one today, but just knowing they existed? That's a buttery slice of history worth remembering. horror stories surfaced that these toys were finally yanked from shelves. Today, anything involving mercury is locked behind hazmat labels and biohazard warnings. But in the 1980s, it was just another shiny toy in the toy chest. And while we are at hazardous, nothing was more festive or flammable than what kids wore every October. Halloween costumes in the 1980s were equal parts imagination and imminent combustion. The materials? Thin plastic, stiff polyester, and a mask that felt like a rubber band choking your face. These outfits came in a cardboard box with a clear window, showing off a crinkled costume and a vacuum-formed mask that smelled like a tire fire. They were sweaty, scratchy, and highly flammable. Add candles, jack-o'-lanterns, or sparklers into the mix, and you had a walking fire hazard. Kids would run from house to house while their capes or plastic sheeting flapped dangerously close to open flames. Some costumes even came with battery packs or accessories that sparked, because clearly, fire safety was not trending. The costumes were usually one-size-fits-none, meaning they dragged on the ground or clung like saran wrap. Parents tried to layer clothes underneath to keep kids warm, unknowingly adding more flammable fabric to the equation. Injuries happened. Fire departments raised concerns. But it wasn't until multiple safety campaigns aired on television, usually during Saturday morning cartoons, that people began paying attention. While those costumes reacted to fire, the next fashion fad reacted to you, and sometimes not in a good way. And no, that is not a metaphor. Hertz actually promoted a real jetpack. The rent-a-car rocket belt was a short-lived idea cooked up in the 1960s when the space craze had everyone thinking the future meant flying through the sky instead of driving on boring roads. Hertz partnered with Bell Aero Systems, who had built a functioning rocket belt for the military. The campaign imagined businessmen renting jetpacks to bypass traffic. The belt could fly for 20 seconds. That was it. And it guzzled hydrogen peroxide like it was soda. The cost was ridiculous, and let us not even talk about safety. There was no steering. You just blasted up, prayed for balance, and hoped you landed somewhere near your destination. As a promo stunt, it was electric. Everyone wanted to try it. But in the real world, it was a lawsuit waiting to happen. It never left the testing phase, and Hertz quickly backed off before someone got launched into a telephone pole. But hey, it was not the only time the 1960s gave kids access to something wildly unsafe, because our next entry is a toy that somehow got approved for the shelves, even though it came with a built-in heating plate. Yes, this really happened. Coca-Cola made clothes, as in actual clothing. Jackets, shirts, and sweatshirts plastered with the iconic Coca-Cola logo, sometimes in cursive so dramatic it looked like a roller coaster had crashed into a soda can. The Coke clothing line hit malls hard in the 1980s, banking on the brand's popularity in that sweet spot between streetwear and soda culture. The problem? Nobody really knew how to wear it. Were you supposed to match it with jeans, with joggers, with a giant can of Coca-Cola in hand for authenticity? You had to really love Coke, not just drink it, but live it. And for the majority of people, that was asking way too much. The line did okay for a hot second in teen catalogs and discount racks, but beyond that, total fizzle. It never became a lasting trend, and the clothes aged about as well as a soda left open on the counter. Retro charm can only go so far. And while we're on the subject of old-school gadgets trying to reinvent themselves, let us talk about the time Viewmaster thought it could compete with video games, and failed faster than you can say, click to turn. Imagine a time when music was a grand event, centered around a large, horned apparatus that seemed as much a piece of art as a music player. The gramophone, introduced in the late 19th century by Emil Berliner, transformed home entertainment by bringing recorded sound to the masses. This marvel of engineering spun its magic into homes, creating a culture of listening that laid the groundwork for all future music playback devices. The gramophone, once sidelined by sleeker music devices, finds its legacy in the vinyl comeback, echoing its rich sounds. This elegant pioneer remains a testament to technology's enduring magic, connecting past and present in music. The family station wagon was more than just a car. It was a rolling apartment on wheels. It had wood paneling, questionable suspension, and one golden rule: there were no seatbelts in the way back. That rear-facing back seat was the stuff of legends. You would sit back there waving at traffic, making faces at strangers, and maybe getting a little carsick if the ride got too bumpy. Up front, Mom and Dad argued about directions while the kids in the middle wrestled over snacks. And in the back, chaos. You could pile in 8 kids if you tried hard enough. Nobody thought to buckle up because most of the time, there was nothing to buckle into. The idea of a 5-point harness or a booster seat was light years away. If you stopped too fast, you just braced yourself on the seat in front of you, or on your sibling's face. Road trips were long, uncomfortable, and totally unregulated. And speaking of things that were dangerously unregulated, let's talk about those home science kits. You know, the ones with actual radioactive material inside. Meet the Zeroids. These little battery-powered space robots were the toy store darlings of the late 1960s. They came in shiny chrome colors, had blinking lights, and were advertised as intelligent space companions from another galaxy. Ideal Toy Company pushed them hard, promising a whole line of robot helpers that could perform missions, carry cargo, and respond to their environment. What they actually did was drive in circles, fall over, and occasionally make beeping sounds if you were lucky. Kids thought they were getting the future of artificial intelligence. What they got was a shiny plastic brick with tiny wheels and a bad sense of direction. The battery life was a joke. The gears jammed constantly. And if the carpet was even slightly fluffy, forget it. Your Zeroid was going nowhere. But hey, it looked cool on the shelf. Parents bought them by the dozen for Christmas, but most ended up buried in toy boxes by January. Still, the dream of bringing futuristic tech into everyday life was alive and well. In fact, the very next year, people lined up at the World's Fair to try something even wilder, making a video call face-to-face from a phone booth. Gasoline-fueled model cars were as close as a child could get to operating a flamethrower without a license. These weren't battery-powered toy cars. These were mini combustion engines, fueled by real gasoline or nitromethane that roared across driveways like demonic Hot Wheels. You'd fill the tiny tank, pull the starter cord, and hope it didn't catch fire in your hands. The engine would sputter, cough, then scream to life with the sound of a weed whacker on steroids. Once running, these things hit 30 miles per hour easy. Control was optional. You'd aim it straight, watch it veer into the neighbor's leg, and hope it didn't explode. They were hot, loud, and prone to sudden flare-ups. Burns, inhalation hazards, and flying debris were just part of the charm. Parents thought it was good engineering fun. Emergency rooms thought otherwise. Eventually, the combination of fire risk, noise complaints, and endless injury reports forced manufacturers to pivot toward electric versions. Today's RC cars run cool and quiet. But back then, if yours didn't have a trail of smoke behind it, were you even playing? And speaking of painful toys disguised as accessories, let's not forget what happened when slap bracelets started slicing through sleeves and skin. The Atari MindLink sounds like something a supervillain would use to take over the world, but in reality, it was a headband, a plastic one, that claimed to read your thoughts and turn them into in-game controls. The promise was simple: no hands, no controllers, just your mind. And that promise immediately hit a brick wall called 1980s science. The MindLink was supposed to pick up electrical signals from your forehead muscles and translate them into commands. In practice, that meant you had to clench and twitch your brow in weird ways to move a pixel around the screen. The truth was that the MindLink was way ahead of its time, and not in a good way. It launched into testing and was quickly shelved when even Atari realized nobody wanted to win Space Invaders with their eyebrows. Maybe it would have worked better as a meditation trainer or a fancy headache inducer. Either way, the MindLink was canceled before it ever hit store shelves, and thank goodness, because if it had gone mainstream, we might all be sitting in silence, furrowing our brows to check email. Now let us move from mind control to media meltdown with a television icon who could not quite make the jump from cool to coherent. Riding in the back of pickup trucks on the highway was just another part of growing up in the 1970s. No seatbelt, no harness, no parental panic attack, just wind in your face and the open road ahead. If you were lucky, you got the wheel well spot so you had something to lean against. If you were really lucky, the driver didn't take sharp turns like they were auditioning for a car chase movie. This wasn't just for country kids either. Suburbs, small towns, even city outskirts. Kids and teens would pile into the back like it was a parade float made of rust and dreams. It sounds completely reckless now because, well, it kind of was. But back then, freedom came first. Safety regulations? A suggestion at best. You needed to haul 6 kids to baseball practice in a truck meant for 3? You made it work. You needed a last-minute ride to the store? Hop in the back. And nobody worried about speed limits or sudden stops. But as safety studies piled up and laws tightened, this practice slowly hit the brakes. Now, in most states, it is straight up illegal. And honestly, it is a miracle more kids did not go flying out onto the freeway. Still, back then, it was a badge of honor. No one was wearing helmets. You just held on to the side and hoped your older cousin didn't start doing donuts. And speaking of things that could land you in the emergency room, let's talk about what toy companies were casually selling to kids like it was no big deal. Long before texting and swiping, there was the thrill of spinning a rotary dial or the sharp click of a push-button phone. Invented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876, the landline phone was the cornerstone of communication. These phones were built like tanks, and hanging up with a slam was its own kind of satisfaction. As cell phones began to dominate in the late 20th century, the once ubiquitous landline started its slow retreat. Yet, in some homes, the landline lives on, a reminder of simpler, more connected times. Remember when phone numbers started with words? Call KL55555, a testament to a time when phone numbers were a jingle, not just a sequence. Breakdancing mats were the ultimate flex in the 1980s. Thin vinyl sheets with printed grids, graffiti fonts, or neon lightning bolts that promised to turn your living room into a downtown dance battle. But the reality? They were slip-and-slide death traps for anyone not named Turbo or Ozone. These mats were sold as practice zones for your windmills and headspins, but came with exactly 0 grip. You'd try to bust a move and your feet would shoot out like you were skating on butter. Carpet? Too bumpy. Hardwood? Too fast. Concrete? Say goodbye to your kneecaps. Kids ended up with twisted ankles, bruised hips, and rug burns that rivaled carpet burn from summer sleepovers. Some mats would fold or ripple mid-spin, launching dancers sideways into furniture. And let's not forget the ones that came with sound effects, usually embedded electronics that broke by day 3 and left you with a $30 piece of plastic sadness. Eventually, people started using cardboard instead, because oddly enough, the trash worked better than the toy. Still, if you ever tried a headspin on one of those mats, you know exactly what it felt like to nearly break a hip before the age of 10. And while that mat just made you fall, the next invention brought literal firepower to playtime. Let's not pretend it was ever going to work. The Hertz Rent-A-Car Rocket Belt promo was pure space-age wishful thinking. It was 1966, and Hertz thought, what if the average American didn't just rent a car, but rented a rocket? The pitch was that you could skip traffic and soar through the skies with a rented jetpack. They partnered with Bell Aero Systems, who had a functioning rocket belt prototype used in military demonstrations. On paper, incredible. In practice, a disaster waiting to happen. The belt could only fly for about 20 seconds on a full tank. You would rise up, wobble like a balloon in a windstorm, and slam back down, if you were lucky. It burned through fuel fast, cost tens of thousands of dollars, and had the directional control of a runaway firecracker. Still, the image was unforgettable. A businessman in a suit flying to work over the morning commute. Hertz ran with it for a minute, then quietly dropped it when they realized, the laws of physics still existed. This was less of a transportation idea and more of a comic book scene. And while it disappeared almost instantly, It left behind a legacy of American companies trying way too hard to predict the future. Speaking of which, there's nothing like building a revolutionary new format for home entertainment, only to have it fail not once, but twice. Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future. Even the title sounds like it is trying a little too hard. This was not just a show, it was an experience. It blended live-action television with interactive toys that could shoot and receive fire using light signals. The toys would respond to what was happening on screen. Miss a blast, lose points, hit a target, score. It was the 1980s equivalent of augmented reality. And for about 5 minutes, it felt revolutionary. But there was one small issue. It was unbelievably complicated. You needed the toys. You needed the right episodes. You needed everything lined up perfectly, or the experience just fell apart. Parents were not thrilled with having to buy an entire shelf of gear just to make the show playable. Kids got frustrated when their PowerJet XT7 refused to register a hit or randomly shut off mid-battle. The show itself was dark, overly serious, and way too intense for its age group. It felt like a war documentary with lasers. The toy-to-show synergy was ahead of its time, but far too messy to last. The dream of fusing television and toys never quite stuck the landing. But if you thought that was an ambitious media crossover, just wait until you hear about the time our favorite sarcastic alien tried to host his own late-night talk show. The boombox, a hefty symbol of the 80s music scene, carried more than just tunes. It carried an attitude. With its shoulder-perched silhouette, it declared music a communal experience, blaring the beats of hip-hop and rock into the streets and parks. Its arrival marked the democratization of music, pulling it out of living rooms and into public spaces. As personal listening devices became the norm, the boombox's prominence faded, but not its impact. Today, its spirit lives on in the portable Bluetooth speakers that soundtrack our picnics and beach outings. A nod to the era when music was not just heard, but felt, a tactile presence in the air around us. Paint sets in the 1980s made art fun, messy, and occasionally permanently harmful. Many came in colorful plastic trays with cheerful cartoon mascots, perfect for little hands and curious mouths. The catch? Those bold, beautiful colors were often lead-based. That's right. Some of the same pigments used to paint warning signs and old bridges were hiding in your watercolor kit. Kids would dip brushes, fingers, and sometimes their actual tongues into the paint, blissfully unaware that they were absorbing a neurotoxin. Lead poisoning from paint was not some obscure risk. It was a common medical concern in the 80s, especially for kids who spent hours doodling on paper, cardboard, or the wall behind the couch. Parents had no clue. Schools didn't ask questions. It was only when regulation agencies started cracking down that the art supply world scrambled to create non-toxic alternatives. Lead-free labels started appearing on every box. But if you ever used a paint set that smelled a little too chemical and stained your fingers for 2 days, you may have had more exposure than a power plant worker. And when you were done painting, it was time to hit the dance floor on something that had the traction of a banana peel. If you have ever seen a car and thought, this needs more fins, chrome, and maybe a rocket engine, then General Motors had your back in 1959 with the Firebird III. It pushed its weird legacy into the 1960s, and boy, did it push hard. This thing looked like a jet fighter got stuck halfway through transforming into a convertible. It had 7 fins, a clear bubble cockpit, and joystick controls. Yes, a joystick, no steering wheel. The idea was to let drivers feel like pilots. They even threw in an onboard computer named UniControl that would help manage the car's systems. But here is the kicker. This spaceship on wheels never left the showroom. The tech was laughably overcomplicated for its time. The joystick was hard to control. The computer, basically just blinking lights and a fancy name. No one could actually drive it safely, and the general public wanted something that could, fit in a parking spot. The Firebird III lived its entire life as a museum piece, a rolling prop from a future that never arrived. Still, it looked cool. And back then, looking cool was half the battle. If only they put that much energy into something practical, like, say, communicating with someone across town. But as it turns out, even that was not so simple. Popper toys were supposed to bounce, not try to kill you. You remember them, those colorful half-sphere rubber domes you'd flip inside out, set on a table, and wait for the dramatic pop. They'd launch into the air, bounce off walls, and send toddlers into fits of laughter. But that laughter turned into choking sounds more often than toy companies would like to admit. The smaller ones were just the right size to lodge in a child's windpipe. No warning labels, no age recommendations, just a bin full of potential emergency visits. If it bounced under the couch, your little sibling would be the first to dive after it, and sometimes straight into a medical emergency. Parents bought them by the dozen at grocery store checkout lanes. Eventually, safety boards stepped in, issuing recalls and choking hazard warnings left and right. The toy aisle cleaned up a little. But if you grew up in the 80s, you know the truth. That little rubber dome had the soul of a landmine. And if that did not take your eye out, the next one just might, because it had actual spinning metal blades. Laserdisc karaoke machines for home use were the audio equivalent of bringing a jet engine to a dinner party. These bulky systems promised a high-tech singing experience complete with massive laserdiscs that looked like vinyl records from the future. They came with tiny microphones, video lyrics, and a catalog of songs that somehow made every living room feel like a karaoke bar at 2 a.m., and not in a good way. The disc-changing process was awkward. The song selection was dated even for the time, and the video footage that played behind the lyrics often looked like someone filmed it in a dentist's waiting room. The microphones were low quality, the volume controls were chaotic, and the speakers distorted your voice into a shrill echo that could wake the neighbors. And not in a fun, come join us way. They were expensive, heavy, and quickly became outdated once smaller, sleeker, and more user-friendly CD-based systems rolled in. But if you thought singing poorly to a crowd of annoyed relatives was bad, imagine trying to impress someone with your personality through perfume that matched your horoscope sign. The 8-track tape, peaking in the 1970s, revolutionized music playback with its unique design, offering 4 programs for easier access to favorite songs and eliminating the need to flip sides. A standout feature was the innovative converter, allowing cassettes to play in 8-track players, a significant boon when cassettes emerged, and most still owned 8-track car players. Though surpassed by more compact formats, the 8-track's legacy of continuous play profoundly influences today's streaming experiences, ensuring its unforgettable mark on music history. Despite its descent into nostalgia, the 8-track's contributions to effortless and uninterrupted music enjoyment paved the way for the seamless listening standards we cherish today. Zodiac-inspired perfume sets had their 15 minutes of fame when New Age culture exploded across America in the 1980s. Suddenly, everything had to do with your astrological sign, your diet, your love life, and yes, even your smell. These perfume kits came packaged in elaborate boxes with swirling star charts and inspirational quotes. Each scent was carefully crafted to represent the energy of a specific sign. Aries got something spicy and bold. Pisces, soft and floral. Sagittarius, something that smelled like sandalwood met a vanilla candle in a crystal shop. It was all a little much. The problem? The scents were too specific. You could not just wear whatever. You were expected to commit to your Zodiac scent like it was your spiritual destiny. And worst of all, the trend did not last. Once the New Age boom simmered down, so did the demand for Virgo body mist. The boxes were bulky, the fragrances had a short shelf life, and it turned out people would rather smell good than smell astrologically accurate. These perfume sets became novelty gifts and gag presents long before they were cleared from store shelves. But if you thought niche perfume was a strange mashup, let us take a seat, literally, in one of the worst household design ideas to ever blast soft rock from under your butt. Glow-in-the-dark stickers in the 1980s were the ultimate bedroom accessory. Stars, moons, alien decals, you'd slap them all over your ceiling and bask in the celestial glow every night. But here's the fun part. Some of them were literally radioactive. To get that long-lasting shine, certain manufacturers used phosphorescent paint that contained trace amounts of radium or tritium, materials that should have come with a Geiger counter, not a sheet of stickers. Sure, it looked magical at bedtime, but it was emitting low levels of radiation while you slept 2 feet below it. Parents had no clue. Kids loved it. And meanwhile, your space room was quietly setting off alarm bells in a future safety inspector's mind. As awareness of radiation risks grew, these glow-in-the-dark paints were pulled off the market or reformulated with safer alternatives. But the damage? Already done in bedrooms across the country. While that glow was subtle, the next invention didn't mess around. It promised to melt fat with the power of electricity. Before the age of sleek athleisure and breathable fabrics, the 1980s gave us Diaglow workout gear. It was made from fluorescent neoprene, yes, that same thick, stretchy material you find in wetsuits, and it covered every inch of your body like your thighs owed someone money. Neon pink, electric green, traffic cone orange, you name it. Someone wore it to aerobics. The idea was to be bold, vibrant, and energetic. The result was usually something closer to a walking safety vest. These outfits were all over workout tapes, with instructors bouncing around in skin-tight ensembles that squeaked when they stretched. It made you sweat like you were jogging inside a microwave. And when you put it on, you looked less like a fitness enthusiast and more like someone who got lost on their way to a roller disco. Yet people bought them in droves because the commercials promised that if you wore Diaglow, you were serious about your health and your fashion. But let's be real, it was more punishment than performance. Eventually, the trend burned out when everyone realized looking like a glow stick was not worth passing out mid-jumping jack. But if you thought sweating in neon was uncomfortable, just wait until we get into a home appliance that fizzled out almost as fast as it carbonated, literally. Now, Polaroid's 360 land camera should have been a hit. Polaroid was already flying high in the 1960s. Everyone loved the idea of snapping a photo and watching it develop in real time. The 360 model took things up a notch. It had electronic flash support, a fancy focusing system, and loads of bells and whistles. It was supposed to be the professional-grade Polaroid, perfect for serious photographers and advanced hobbyists. Problem was, nobody asked for that. The 360 was bulky, expensive, and relied on complicated battery packs that drained faster than the flash could charge. Half the time, the film jammed. The focusing system required a steady hand and an engineer's patience. And even if you got everything to work, the pictures were not that much better than the simpler models. Most families just wanted something quick and easy for birthdays and vacations, not a camera that made you feel like you were defusing a bomb. Eventually, Polaroid wised up and leaned back into simplicity. The 360? It got shelved. But hey, if complicated tech was the name of the game, nobody played it harder than the company that tried to sell smart robots to kids. Robots that mostly just spun in place. So imagine this. It is 1961, and you are cruising down the road in what looks like a spaceship on 2 wheels. That was the dream Ford tried to sell with the Giron. It was a futuristic concept car that did away with 4 wheels entirely. Instead, it balanced on just 2, using a gyroscope, yes, like the kind in science fiction movies. There were no pedals, no steering wheel, and barely any chance you would be able to drive it. But man, did it look cool. The body was sleek, all sharp angles and bubble domes, and it screamed speed even though it never actually hit the highway. Ford hyped it up big at car shows, but behind the curtains everyone knew it was all show and no go. The technology just was not there. The gyroscope was hard to manage, and the car itself was so unstable it needed little kickstands when parked. It never made it past the showroom floor. The original prototype? Destroyed in a fire. The Giron did not just fail, it vanished. But that did not stop companies from continuing their obsession with the future. In fact, the very next year, one of them tried to bring the future into your living room. You just needed an extra $1,000 and a lot of patience. plastic swords from the 1980s were marketed as toys, but they swung like weapons. These weren't the foam-filled pool noodles of today. They were thick, rigid, injection-molded plastic, often with jagged edges or molded blades sharp enough to cut paper and maybe a sibling. The worst ones came with faux metallic paint that chipped off into your hands and eyes during every pretend duel. You'd whack your friends with full-force backyard swings, and instead of a bonk, you got a thwack followed by a loud ow. Eyebrows were split, cheeks were welted. And if you really got carried away, a trip to urgent care. No one wore helmets. No one wore padding. These toys were sold in the same aisle as coloring books and stuffed animals. Eventually, toy safety groups stepped in, and by the 1990s, anything that resembled a plastic weapon had to be padded, foamed, or dulled down to baby-safe levels. You think that's wild? Wait until we get into the next bouncing nightmare that doubled as a choking hazard. If these gadgets lived in your childhood kitchen, tell us in the comments. We won't judge you missing the soap penguin. Subscribe and like before another weird invention disappears.